Today, I am not going to talk about things I know about the world of rare books. Instead, I'm going to talk about things that I do not know about rare books. One of the wonderful things about the rare book business is its infinite variety. It is the full range of human knowledge, and you can't know everything about books. You're always making discoveries and wondering about those discoveries. So I've put together a few examples here of some recent purchases, of things that have left me wondering. I have not done the research. I do not have the answers to my questions. Again, this is things I do not know about the world of rare books. Perhaps you have some insight. The first is a 15th century Book of Hours. This was produced, this is a Dutch Book of Hours, about 1450. Books of Hours were devotional books of the medieval and Renaissance periods. You would have a scribe write out the various prayers, and separately in a workshop, you would have miniaturists create small little paintings that would later be bound into the book. These were extraordinarily expensive productions. They were often commissioned for rich patrons. But by the mid-15th century in France and in the Netherlands, you started to see the stirrings of the early commercialization of these. What is curious about this example is the opening miniature of Saint Sebastian. Now, normally when I think about a miniature painting, I think about a drawing that has been illuminated. But upon very careful inspection of this miniature, you can actually see that it is a woodcut and not drawn by hand and later illuminated to look like a painting. I have not seen that before in a Book of Hours. I do not know if it's common. I just haven't paid attention to it, to be honest. But I think it's very interesting because I think the use of woodcuts speaks again to that early commercialization. It's the earliest mass production of books, the dissemination of knowledge. So I wonder how often woodcuts were used to lower production costs in early manuscript production. So that is something I do not know about rare books. Moving on here, I got two books here. Gilding in rare books. Gilding in books comes from originally from the 14th century, from Islamic cultures. You see a lot of Qurans that have been gilded. And like a lot of Islamic art and ornamentation, it made its way into Venice. And by the 16th century, the mid-16th century, there's a great proliferation of gilt stamping on books in Italy. Two examples here from the shop I chose. One is a particularly early example. It's actually the earliest example of gilt stamping I have here. It is a book of Ovid printed by the famous printer Aldus Manutius. What is nice is that it is dated 1536 on the binding. It almost looks like blind stamping without any gilding, but if you look very carefully, you can see the remnants of the gilt. It probably faded over the years because it was early on and they did not master the techniques of the adhesives to make the gilt last over the centuries. But a nice early example. This second example is one of my favorites. It is a 1582 Breviary. And you can see the improved technique of the stamping. The reason it is one of my favorites is because of the little character of the Grim Reaper at the back. He doesn't look so grim. He's waving there to the YouTube audience. So two nice examples of gilt stamping, which raises the question I had of what is the earliest surviving Western book with gilt stamping on its bookbinding? I don't have the answer to that. If you know, feel free to comment. It's probably early in the 16th century in Venice, if I had to guess. But take a look on the internet. And something else I do not know about rare books. moving on here. This is a nice copy, 1541, of the Sonnets of Petrarch. What I like about this book is the title is placed on the bottom edge of the book. Now, unlike today, where you expect the title on the spine of the book because of the way we store books in a bookcase, books in the Renaissance and the medieval periods were not stored in the modern way. In fact, the modern bookcase was not really invented until the 17th century. I saw in the Victorian Albert Museum one of the bookcases that belonged from the 17th century to Samuel Pepys, the diarist. So books were either stored with their spine in or laid flat. And books were expensive commodities, so you generally didn't have libraries of 2,000 books unless you were extraordinarily wealthy. You would have a few books. You might put them on a drawer under a desk, or you might even put them in a box. There is a 1521 book of love poetry here with a nice title page, and what's very charming about it is at the back of the title page, you can see a cupboard open with two books lying flat with their clasps and four edges showing. So it's a nice illustrative example of book storage in the Renaissance. So some books, as I said, have been titled on the top, some on the main foredge, and some on the bottom edge. And I was curious as to which was the most common way of titling books. We all know that books were not stored in the modern way, but what was the most common way that they were stored? Most of the books in the shop here are curiously titled on the bottom edge. I don't know if that is a good statistical sampling of all the books out there, but it shows me at least most of the books were probably just piled up with their bottom edges showing. So a little curious question and something else I do not know about rare books. And finally, I move on to one of the most loved and hated things in all of books, the tissue guard. The tissue guard is a small piece of paper that was placed by publishers between the engraving or illustration of a book and the previous page so that you did not have what we call offsetting, which is bleeding of the ink from the illustration onto the other page. You see it in a lot of 19th century books, especially because of the increased acidity of the wood pulp paper over the old rag paper. Booksellers both love and hate tissue guards. Sometimes, because of the acidity, they do more damage to books than they were intended to prevent. This particular example comes from 1776. That's always a good year. And it's one of the earliest examples I have found of a book with tissue guards placed in by the publisher, which raises the small question, and I have to ask it because, again, it is one of the most modest things, so I feel like it's owed a question. Why did publishers use tissue guards beginning in the 18th century? Was it the change of paper and they noticed an increased acidity? Was it because of the types of engravings they used as they moved perhaps from copper plate engravings to steel engravings? Did that increase the bleeding of the ink, the offsetting? But for whatever reason, they started placing them to the great dismay of many booksellers in a lot of books going forward. So the modest tissue guard and something else I do not know about rare books. So I hope you've liked this little chat. You'll hit subscribe and you will listen to some future episodes, and I'll try and give you some more insights into the world of rare books.